Area of Responsibility meeting. As you know, this is another meeting to largely focus on these wider discussions that are happening around what is being called the humanitarian reset. I wanted to update you on like the progress and the process and some of the discussions that are happening. Thank you to those of you colleagues who've contributed some comments to the scenarios paper that we shared about a month ago. And that was when we were thinking through some of the implications of what was being suggested. Obviously, this whole discussion is only part of the work that we do and that we're interested in. Most of us are quite geeky around housing, land and property beyond the cluster system and beyond coordination. And just to say, we will have a meeting in June, probably towards the end of June. It will be more like our usual discussion around kind of substantive thematic HLP issues and what the responses in the operations look like, and an exchange around some of those kind of key issues. But I wanted to bring you updated news just from the discussions around the reset, because there's lots going on, lots of moving parts, and this will kind of impact in some way the work that we do. So I thought it was worth spending a short time looking at that today. I think someone might not be muted. I can just hear some feedback. There we go, got it. Eleonora sends her apologies. She's out sick today, otherwise would be here. But yes, is aware of these discussions as well, and from UN Habitat side has been part of these as well. So I'm just going to share my screen. I wanted to first just talk you through some of the processes that are happening, some of the discussions that are ongoing. If you want to come in at any point, you can either raise your hand or just chime in. If I'm not seeing you, you do speak up. It's recorded today just to be shared amongst the colleagues who might not be able to make it. So bear that in mind when you're intervening. And if you want to get in touch with me bilaterally, and then please do either on Teams or through email. I can share some details later. And it might be nice to introduce ourselves in the chat, as we don't really have time to go round. But if you'd like to say who you are, where you're working, that would be great. And if any of you would like to turn on your camera and just say hello and give me a wave, it's always nice to know that there's people here behind the initials or the logos that I see. I know some of you can't turn on your cameras, and that's fine. But if you can, always nice to see you. Great. Okay, so let me just share my screen, and then we can walk through. And please, like I say, do stop me at any moment. We'll have time to discuss, and I want to hear from you. And this is the part of a process and sort of start of a process, rather than being all done or anything like that. But I just wanted to give you the latest. Okay, so like I mentioned, today I want to look at the recommendations that have been put forward, explain what that means, whose recommendations for what, and what's next, and then just thinking a little bit about our response in the future. And then there's a few other news and events that I just want to highlight, and maybe we'll have time for some AOB as well, if any of you have things you want to share. But apologies for the sort of more delivery nature of this call, but I wanted to be able to update you, and then we'll have time, as I say, in June to kind of return to our more normal way of working. So the first thing to talk about, so we're talking about like the humanitarian reset, which is being discussed, which was something set in motion by the emergency relief coordinator Tom Fletcher, who's like the head of OCHA, and I think UN Under Secretary General. So he kind of leads the UN-led sort of humanitarian cluster system, sets the tone, sets the sort of the view of that, has called for this reset that was kind of initially in light of the funding crisis as a result of the US change in policy and approach, but also is reflecting other donors and their commitments to funding changing, and also kind of wider questions around how do we make the humanitarian response system more effective and more streamlined and focused on what it needs to do. All those kind of questions that have been bubbling around for a while have all sort of come to a little bit of a head just now, and we're like reviewing the whole sort of process. as part of this process, there has been an opportunity for the global cluster coordinators, which includes the areas of responsibility, to feed into a consultation with the OPAG. So this is part of the IASC, the Interagency Standing Committee, and it's the Operational Policy and Advocacy Group. So they serve like to sort of drive the sort of strategic policy work of the IASC. So they're looking at system-wide policy matters and how that impacts humanitarian operations. That's lifted direct from the web page, so you can quote that. But yeah, so that's their aim, and it's kind of, you know, real senior people from the UN agencies, and there's also input from some NGOs and NGO representative bodies as well, and also the Red Cross are represented and others. So it's a space where, you know, and that's going to feed directly into the principal level discussions that are going to set the agenda for what the system looks like going forward. So we were part of a consultation. That's come to an end now. It wasn't about reaching a consensus, but it was around providing ideas, and then the chairs of that process were going to make some recommendations to sort of send up the chain, as it were. And the idea, as my understanding, is that in June there will be meetings that will kind of choose a way forward on this. So there's still a little bit of time for lobbying and advocacy and all these things, but essentially from the cluster side, we've sort of finished our direct input to the conversation, and we wait for the discussion in June, and hopefully a bit of clarity about what comes next from that. Of course, there's also these discussions around UN at 80 and wider conversations going on. So we'll see what actually is decided in June, and hopefully will bring some clarity for us as we move forward. Sorry, I was just checking everyone was being let in. Okay. So as part of the recommendations, there were several kind of chapters of this. There was one set of recommendations looking at flexible, simplified coordination system. Now, this is the one we'll talk a little bit more about later, about the structure of the clusters, what clusters are going to exist, will the areas of responsibility exist, those kind of things. Then there are also recommendations that look at these other areas on the screen. So about making coordination more accountable and locally led, operations focused, and a part around activation and deactivation and transition. So I'll just set those out for you so you can see them, and I'll share this presentation afterwards so you can have a look in more detail. But essentially around the accountable and locally led coordination, there's all sorts of ways to basically bring things together, make things work in a more coherent way, but really to prioritize and make sure kind of local national actors are coordinating or co-coordinating or co-leading coordination groups at all sorts of levels, make sure the funding is going to those local national actors as well, and also making sure that everything we're doing in terms of servicing and those kind of multi-sectoral ways of working really reflect the realities and promote that multi-sectoral way of working. And there's an emphasis on cash. So yeah, you can have a look at this in your time, but essentially it's about how can we make sure coordination is more locally led and more accountable to the people impacted and affected by what's happening. Things that, of course, we've all been trying to work on more, but I think are getting a real sort of accelerated push just now. Then around the operations focused recommendations, we're talking about sort of these ideas around pooling capacity and common services. So there's been discussions for a while about how do we pool sort of IM, information management, data resources and analysis. How can we make sure they're sort of drawing on all the possibilities that technology can give us in terms of working more effectively, can work across agencies and other actors, make it easier to kind of share information and work together on that. Again, these ideas have been discussed for a little while, but I think, again, a real push to do that. And for us in HLP, many of us work like this anyway because of the limited resources. We always draw on whoever else is around and working on these issues to make sure we do what we need to do. There's also then something around the more sort of integrated way of working in coordination. So the idea that in-country cluster coordinators would be co-located, so sharing the same space to encourage that very sort of physical material interaction and collaboration, which in theory should help sort of make it a more sort of joined up approach. And so that's one thing that is being suggested. Another area is to just sort of really kind of focus on and prioritize this area-based coordination approach. There's still some work being done to define exactly what that means. but trying to look at an area and sort of see a more integrated approach that actually draws on all the needs and requirements in that area, and then defines and decides on the response based on that, as opposed to bringing all our different tools and seeing where we can be active. So that's something that could change, especially at the subnational level, the way of working a little bit more, and could be quite an interesting one. And of course, we'll raise some questions, and as we hear more details, we will also make sure we pass them on. Around activation, deactivation, and transition, I mean, in theory, there's supposed to be regular checks and reviews to make sure the clusters are needed in a certain scenario. There should be a review going on. I think it's annually, but that doesn't always happen. So again, an emphasis on making sure that happens, and just a real kind of push to make sure the humanitarian coordinators and their teams to have a real deliberate transition planning as part of what they're doing right from the beginning. And that this is done where possible with the national local authorities as soon as the cluster is activated. So we're thinking about exit if we've come from outside, but we're thinking about the end of that work if we're sort of starting there within the country. And yeah, so there's also just extra efforts to make sure we think around how do we deactivate, what does that look like? There's been some recent work done learning from particularly Iraq around transitions away from the humanitarian cluster system into maybe solutions or something else, to try and make sure that process is smooth and leads well into the next phases that may be coming. And for housing, land and property, we've often talked about HLP as like this golden thread across the humanitarian response, but right through into transition solutions and all of that work, because of course it links into that recovery stage as well as in the crisis response as well. But yeah, so some extra efforts on that. And then on the flexible simplified coordination system. So this is where we're sort of thinking about the structure of the clusters and the AoRs. So this might be the one that generates a bit more discussion and might impact us a little bit more in terms of the processes that we're part of. So at country level, the humanitarian coordinator and their teams would be sort of more empowered to decide which clusters to activate and which can be merged. So they would have real flexibility to look at the context, look at the situation and decide what's needed. The example that's in the paper is around, if there isn't acute malnutrition particularly, then maybe the nutrition cluster would not be activated. And so having that flexibility at the country level, which often is the case, but the HCs would really be empowered to make those decisions, which, of course, it could be really sort of effective and useful. But if there is an HC or an HCT that maybe have less of a focus on the things we think are important, that might feel a little bit difficult. But that is what's happening. So at the country level, and I know for many of you who work on the operational side, you are involved in these prioritization exercises, discussions around where the emphasis should go, and a real kind of streamlining of what's happening. Then at the global level, there's been this recommendation made to simplify the cluster system. So go from 11 clusters down to 8. And what that means in practice is the merging of the ETC and logistics clusters. So telecommunications and logistics as part of this new service cluster, and the creation of a cluster that focuses on sort of elements around ground and land and place, which is shelter and CCCM clusters kind of merging to form a new cluster. But that the suggestion is also that HLP would be included in that. So there would be one cluster, a new cluster. So it's not about joining in with shelter, but it's a new cluster combining those elements. Still many discussions to be had around cluster lead agencies and what that would look like in practice. But that's the recommendation, quite top line. But there's also this slight tension for us as HLP, because that's mentioned there, but there's also discussions around the protection cluster. So the end of the protection AoRs and then being consolidated into one cluster. So there aren't separate coordination structures action, but there's this one cluster and a much more consolidated sort of shared approach, which in theory in some places sometimes happens. And we know with HLP, if the AoR isn't activated, then that is what can happen anyway, to a degree. But yeah, that raises all sorts of questions in terms of, presence within all the humanitarian program cycle, all the analysis. How do we have representation? How do we get visibility? How do we push for those HLP issues to be considered? And does that impact our work to be able to influence and impact others and other clusters as well. So again, lots of questions around what that would look like. And at the moment, there is work going on between some of the lead agencies from those clusters to try and understand more, papers being developed and discussed around what would need to happen for that protection cluster option to work. But yeah, again, as those conversations bear fruit, I will share that more widely. But I just wanted to sort of pause for a moment to acknowledge the comments that many of you have made on the scenarios paper that was shared in the meeting invite, and has been sort of, that some of you have commented on, that puts forward some of these scenarios that we were seeing a month or so ago that could be option. I just wanted to summarize some of the comments and feedback that we've been getting, just to give you a flavor of what's been discussed. So on the joint new cluster with Shelter and CCCM, there's been some concerns around what might be lost if we take HLP out of a protection space, but that maybe there is an aspect of it building on the momentum around HLP and humanitarian response that cuts across many aspects. There'd be a real need to advocate for HLP and protection focal point sort of maybe within the GPC, so there's still that link with the protection cluster, and that within the new imagined cluster, there'd have to be a particular HLP pillar that not only does the HLP work relevant for Shelter and CCCM colleagues, but also makes sure there's an emphasis on those protection aspects around evictions, restitution, access to land and housing for more vulnerable at-risk populations, and others. So yeah, so there's a kind of a need to basically make sure we're advocating and working hard to position HLP within that structure, if that's what happens. So some questions there around, what we need to protect, but also around sort of an opportunity there to be more integrated with our CCCM Shelter colleagues as well, but in a way that is reframed. So that's kind of the conversation that's going on, and some background informal conversations with those colleagues. I think there's an appreciation of that, but of course that's still ongoing. On the protection cluster aspect, there's, I think, the comments that were coming through in response to this on the paper were that there's a lack of clarity about what this really means. And just to say, there's some suggestions. Could the GPC be co-led? Obviously, you've got UNHCR that leads the cluster. Maybe there could be a representative from GBV or Child Protection that co-lead it. But I think one of the points is that there's a risk of there being no HLP focal point within the cluster. There would be some kind of focal point, but what visibility that would have, what decision-making power that would have, is not clear. A question around what it would mean for information management. How do we make sure we maintain the sort of great work that Trezel's been supporting, but make sure there's a dedicated information management HLP focus to allow for evidence-based sort of decision-making that we're trying to do. And just a risk of losing that HLP leadership within the cluster system if that protection cluster doesn't have the space to really allow for HLP issues to be shared as we would like them to be. So that's some of the comments that have been coming in. What I wanted to do is stop for a moment and open up to questions and comments and ideas, and then and I've got a couple of suggestions on some next steps. So, for example, one of the things that came up before was around ensuring that we have some safeguards in place, things that we would really advocate for around housing, land and property that must be included, whether HLP sits with protection or Shelter CCCM hybrid cluster thing. What are the key HLP issues, either processes and ways of working, but also the issues that we need to have maintained within the humanitarian response system. So that could be something we work on together. That's one idea that's been coming through. But yeah, I just want to pause there and open to questions, comments, reactions. And I'm aware I'm going quite quickly, so you might want to watch the recording back as well. And you're very welcome to contact me directly. As I say, but yeah, open to the floor for comments or questions. And then after that, I can sort of move on to some other things. Okay, yeah. Who's Barbara? Please, you do come in. Yeah.
Yes. Hi. Thank you, Jim, for this update. First, what does CLA mean? You said
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. Cluster lead agency. So at the moment, the HLP
Okay.
AoR is NRC and UN Habitat. For the protection cluster, it's UNHCR. Yeah. And for the shelter cluster currently is UNHCR and IFRC, so International Federation of Red Cross. And for the CCCM cluster, it's IOM and UNHCR. So obviously there's a question there. If the aim is simplification, you've potentially got 5 cluster lead agencies related to shelter, CCCM and HLP. So what does that mean? Plus others who may also be interested, right? So there's, yeah, but that's what that means. Yeah, sorry, Barbara, I should have said.
Okay, no problem. No, and the second question is, I didn't understand. So you said shelter, CCCM, NFI, HLP merged together. And then protection AORs merged together also. But what does it mean? That do we still have an HLP focal point within each of these merged cluster or not? And is it the same? Will it be the same person or not?
Yeah, thanks. Good question. So that's where there's not quite the clarity yet. And these recommendations have kind of been big, wide recommendations that have been turned into this very limited document, because apparently senior people can't read long documents. So we have to have headlines. I'm joking. I know they're very busy. But in case they're listening. But the so the suggestion, and that's where it is a little bit unclear, because there's the conversations that are happening around the protection cluster. So my understanding is that direction seems to be that the AORs won't exist as they do now. That seems to be, I could be wrong, but that seems to be something that is being discussed by a lot of people. So there's ways in which then, how do we see a consolidated protection cluster? There could be focal points for, certainly for child protection, GBV are trying to work out how do they position themselves within that as key protection actors. Mine Action are also talking about where they best fit and how do they work best. For HLP, my understanding would be that if we were to be part of this new cluster with our shelter CCCM colleagues, then that would mean we would have less of a role with the protection cluster. But of course, there would still need to be some kind of focal point, I would hope, within the protection cluster. And in fact, it could be a really interesting way to ensure that there is that more coherent response. But these details are beyond where we are right now. These are sort of almost headline suggestions, and at the moment trying to just get views, trying to understand what the concerns are so that we can try and advocate to mitigate against any risks around this. But yeah, so I don't know, there'd be some connection, because as everyone you speak to about HLP says, there's strong protection angles there, it's a real protection thing, we don't want to lose that, so we would need to work carefully to make sure that's protected if HLP was to join with the others. And I think it's worth saying that it's not a question of, if this does happen, HLP coming under shelter. It's more a question of creating a new cluster with combining shelter, CCCM and HLP. And that would be the space where we would push to make sure that includes the HLP elements that are important and need to not be forgotten if there's, if that merger or that kind of co-working sort of happens. So it might be an expansion of how shelter see HLP, for example, or how CCCM sees HLP. Sorry, there's not that much clarity at the moment. That's part of the problem. But I wanted to update people as to where we're at, just to also allow people to sort of feedback their views as well. So, yeah.
Thanks.
I'll come to Osman then, and then Jose. Osman, over to you first.
Hi, Jim. Hi, colleagues. Osman here from Somalia, HLP AoR coordinator. Yeah, Jim, I want to comment on the area of scaling up area-based coordination. I think it's a good thing, although in some of the countries, here also in Somalia, we're really seeing some bit of challenges, confusion on the transition or the starting of the operations of the area-based, how they coordinate with the existing coordination structures at district level, even other structures. So the experience is that most of the discussions really are done within district level, at district level, where already there have been existing coordination structures done either by the government or maybe by other humanitarian practitioners. So you see a bit of duplication. The same things being discussed in area-based are the same one discussed at district level. So there's need for more clarity, really, and I'm happy to hear that there is going to be discussions around these areas before to make it more clearer, particularly on the scope where the area-based roles are going to stop. Because to me, it makes sense if the discussions have to be based at settlement level, maybe even at a village level, and then they channel them to the district level, and it goes from there up to national level. But if it's the way it is right now in Somalia, I really see a bit of challenges that there's overlapping on some of the things. Same people attend the meetings, you realize, so you see it's not clear enough. So good that more discussions have to be done around this area. The next one, which is the last, of course, for me, is a bit of question or maybe clarity, that in terms of the activation of the clusters, that the HCTs at national level will be given more powers to do that. I don't know if they will be regulated by the colleagues at global level, because I feel maybe, I'm not being coward here, but I feel maybe there is need for a clear guidance on how really this will be done with the involvement of the global level structures, so that it's well coordinated and decisions are not taken just based on specific discussions within country only, but also inputs of the global team. Yeah, that is the last one from me. The request from my side, I may drop off for another ICCG meeting, which I feel is very important as well as 10, but I'm happy to see some of my colleagues from Sub-National attending here, Mohammed Abdueli and Daoud, so they will continue. Thank you, Jim. Back to you. Bye.
Thanks, Osman. Well noted. So yeah, we would count on Somalia's experience to help inform that when we have the chance to discuss. And I think, again, it's probably worth stating that we're trying to feed into these processes, but they go way beyond the exact spaces where we can influence and have control. But we're trying to feed in. So I think it would be great to be able to recommend maybe the learning from Somalia be looked at, especially when they're looking at area-based approaches and coordination. And I know there's a lot of work being done, even to just try and clarify and understand what the term means, what scale we're talking about, what exactly does it look like. So yeah, thanks for that. And on the second point, just quickly on the HCs. So my understanding, there's a whole nother strand of work being done focused on the role of the humanitarian coordinators. Denise Brown, who some of you may know of, who was the HC in Ukraine and somewhere else in West Africa, and I forget which country it was specifically, is looking at a whole stream of work on that, and how do we ensure that those HCs are supported well and have what they need to be able to make those decisions. So yes, totally hear the question, and yeah, it feels like a little bit of a risk, doesn't it, sometimes? So hopefully they will be strengthened to be able to make the decisions that are needed in an even better way. And yet, I guess there will be some kind of link and accountability that will be strengthened there. I don't know the details exactly yet. Maybe others of you do. But yeah, thank you, Osman. Okay. Yeah, Anne-Sophie, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jim, and nice to be back. So I'm Anne-Sophie from DG ECHO, based in Bangkok as regional expert on protection. Stepping in temporarily for Kurita, our normal focal point, who is out on maternity leave soon. Yeah. So I want to. You mentioned yourself under the flexible, simplified coordination system at country level. I think we're starting to see some of the first examples of how that can be put together. And you mentioned yourself, what do we do if we have HCs that maybe are not so protection considerate? And because I think we are starting to see those examples coming out. So I was quite concerned seeing the proposal for Afghanistan, where so you're nodding, you've seen it as well, where there is so-called elevating protection to a strategic level, but completely removing it from operations. For me, there's a big risk for protection and all its AoRs, or whatever it's going to be called in the future, that this means protection gets reduced, sorry, but to centrality of protection and protection mainstreaming. So I wonder, one, how are you discussing this at global level at the moment? I also noticed that HLP had completely disappeared from the Afghanistan overview. And two, yeah, how do we strategize around this? Also, and again, I want to underscore that, you know, donors are also interested in this, so you can also count on us to advocate. I think what is most important from our point of view is whatever it looks like in the future in terms of the coordination structure, is that the technical capacities are maintained in the system. This is really what is super important, because otherwise we risk losing a lot of what we've built up over the past 20 years. Thank you for organizing this. Over.
Thanks, Anne-Sophie. That's, yeah, really helpful intervention. And you're right. I think even at Afghanistan, I think it's even called the sort of centrality of protection work stream or something like that. That there's almost. So there is, there's some, and at global level, we're considering how to respond to that. I know there's contact directly with the colleagues in country, and I think, and in terms of the absence of HLP within that, my understanding is that because HLP in Afghanistan has been this sort of task force within the protection cluster, so it hasn't had its own sort of AoR status like it might in other places, it therefore is just considered under the protection umbrella of the cluster. But that means, of course, in that metric, it disappears in terms of having a space on there, which is a concern for certain. And I think there's suggestions in some other countries of some similar sorts of moves as well. Like I know in Ukraine, they're asking questions about what might happen. There have been other places where these things have been suggested and there's been pushback and advocacy and they've kind of changed their mind. So I think it's one that we need to engage with and keep talking. And I know the Global Protection Cluster is trying to consolidate and bring us in when we can see opportunities to do that. But I'll definitely remember and take on board and pass back that message of the role of donors in this and how to make sure we include you and draw on you and work with you wherever we can. On this, and totally agree on the technical capacities being maintained. I think that's the key thing, and that is one of the things we're going to just mention in a little bit. Like, how can we ensure that we get clear on what those capacities are and what we need to see there? But yeah, thanks so much for that. Jose, to you, and then to Joseph. Jose, over to you.
Yes, thank you. I mean, for me, a bit of the worry is that we are talking a lot about structures and maybe leaving aside the broader strategy, no? So what is the vision? What does the HLP AoR want to achieve? And whether there should be a revision in light of the reset, because it's very clear that there is a role for technical assistance and coordination, but maybe the advocacy component will be more important in this under-resourced scenario, no? So for me, what I will propose to discuss is whether in this scenario, advocacy should be a stronger component of the HLP AoR, including advocacy as we are doing now within the reset, no? Because at the end, this is a call for the inclusion and for making sure that HLP does not become a collateral damage, no, of the whole restructuring. So it's just a question for discussion. You know, should we look also at the strategy, or is it enough to look at the structures? Over to you.
Thanks so much. Yes, it's a bit frustrating sometimes having to be bound by these conversations around structures when that feels like only, like you say, a sort of a part and should be more reflecting what we want to achieve and see happen rather than coming first. Great point. And thanks. I think you made that comment on the document as well, and is one that I wanted to sort of reflect on when we look at the next steps. And I think anything that we produce in terms of that advocacy, that kind of ideas around what the HLP components of a response should look like, needs to think about the sort of the vision and the sort of processes around the AoR and what we can contribute and what we should do. And I like that emphasis on advocacy. I think that's a good question to ask and think about what the role would be going forward. Now, Joseph, you did have your hand up, but I don't know if you've retracted. But feel free.
Yeah, no,
to...
sorry, I put it up. I got a nod, so I took it down.
Oh, I see. Right, yeah, noted. Go on then.
Yeah, no, thanks. Just thanks for the presentation as always. And I just wanted to kind of flag that, yeah, the importance, as Anne-Sophie said, about the importance of technical capacity, but also flag that I think a lot of this, this is driven by money as much as humanitarian needs, and HLP really is important, and technical capacity in it. So just, and in terms of the AoR, just to kind of acknowledge that the support NRC really have put into this going forward, and hope that this won't lead, whatever the structure is, won't lead to a kind of reduction of support from NRC, because I think that's really what's driven that. And I don't know if you can take that back to your bosses, take that back with NRC, that whatever kind of org chart we come up, it doesn't change the humanitarian need for HLP interventions before, during, and after crises, and really kind of hope that NRC can continue supporting and others can step it up as well.
Thanks, Joseph. Yeah, no, well noted. My understanding, and obviously speaking way beyond what I have authority to do, is that there is a commitment to that continued focus on HLP issues, because I think that's the key point, is that HLP issues don't disappear just because we either lose an AoR or whatever, right? So, and we know that they are part of good, effective programming. And I see Fernando's raised his hand, so I'll let him speak for NRC in a moment. But first, Phil, please, over to you.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, I was just reflecting on what Jose was saying a minute ago, and can we define collectively as an AoR membership our vision without knowing how it will be deliverable within a wider system? And I'm not sure that there's any right answer to that question, but the sequencing is kind of the issue, and the fact that this is so top down, and again, I'm not authorized to say that. I'm speaking on my own recognizance rather than that of my organization. But we'll have this new system foisted on us, and I'm as worried as I am for HLP priorities as I am for CCCM in all of its efforts towards safety and governance and participation, as I am about good quality shelter outcomes. And of course, it's all bound up with money as well. But I do think it's a galvanizing moment, and I would reiterate what Joseph just said, that NRC has been so fundamental to this, and I really to the success of the AoR to date, and really hope that that we won't see NGOs a smaller part of the global coordination system going forward. If anything, it should go in the other direction. Thanks very much. Over.
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, it's thinking about the vision for the AoR. I guess maybe something we can have is a vision or a look at what we would emphasize as the priority sort of HLP issues, and then at least get a little bit ahead on that. But I agree, it's hard to know how to articulate that when we don't know how and who we're sort of working. And yeah, the process is top down, and that makes it it's great to try and feed in and gather opinions and advocate for things. But as the colleagues said, they were consulting for ideas, not for consensus. So it was about how do they get ideas, and from that they can then sort of make recommendations. So yes, we'll see what we get. Fernando, over to you.
Hi, Jim. Hi, everyone. Yeah. No, I want to reiterate that NRC is, you just mentioned it, Jim, but reiterate that NRC is willing to continue supporting HLP coordination at all levels, not just at the global HLP AoR level or whatever the next incarnation will be, but also at country level, of course, because we do agree with what has been said here by Joseph, Phil, and Sophia and others about the importance of HLP in humanitarian settings. It is indeed very difficult to know and just start sort of going into the substance of how things will look like until we know finally what the decision about the structures will be, right? And it is unfortunate, I hear Jose loud and clear, but at the same time, until we know exactly how things are going to be looking like, it's a bit difficult to move forward. But from the NRC perspective, at least we have two things that we want to see achieving in the next or happening in the next structure, and one of them is that HLP does not suddenly becomes a single sector issue, and I'm thinking particularly about shelter, but that it can continue to be an issue where we can serve other clusters, other sectors as well, maybe departing from a different structure than what we have today, but still with that sort of broad outlook. And the other one is, well, if it is not sitting within protection, still that does not mean that some of the important protection issues are not going to be brought over to wherever the HLP coordination is sitting in the future, right? And I'm thinking, of course, issues around displaced women, housing and property rights, issues about eviction, forced eviction response, the connection with durable solutions in terms of repossession and restitution and compensation and repossession. So, I mean, all of those sort of protection aspects need to be present and not just have HLP as a part of the shelter or a site management CCCM response. And by this, I don't mean, of course, that the shelter colleagues do not have a protection outlook. We know very well that the shelter cluster also has a gender group and are interested in durable solutions, and they do a number of things beyond what would be considered hardware. But it is important that other protection dimension is not lost in that transition, if that is what finally happens, of course. Thanks.
Thanks, Fernando. Thank you for that. Great. So any other comments or questions at this moment? If not, I'll just go to the next couple of things I wanted to say about maybe where we go from here. And then, of course, at any time, if you want to comment or jump in, please do. I'll just share my screen again. Where is it? There it is. Come on. Okay, so I was thinking, and we were discussing what might be a next step. And one of the things that's come through both in the comments around, how do we think about the vision for the HLP AoR or what we think is important, but also within initial conversations around whether we have a different role within the protection cluster or we have a joint cluster with Shelter CCCM. One of the key things that's come through, I think, is the need to make sure we kind of safeguard or maintain those key elements of HLP, particularly from the protection angle, that need to be there, whatever's happening. There's, if we do lose some kind of visibility or way of articulating this, we need to make sure there's a way of advocating for and understanding what these are. And it feels like that could be something positive to do over the next weeks and months to make sure we get really clear in a really short, accessible way, what are the key issues that need to be thought of. So I was going to propose, and the AOR wanted to propose, we'll call it a task team because it's time-bound focused and has a specific thing, but it could be called anything. But a group that will work on this HLP safeguarding piece, a short kind of advocacy-focused document, both within the clusters, but also for donors can use it for others as well, just to try and set up and articulate what some of the key issues are. If you want to be part of that, I'll put the link in the chat as well. I've just set up a very simple kind of form for you to fill in just with your contact details, that's all. But of course, you can just get in touch with me in the normal ways. I was obviously feeling IT excited or something. But but yes, so there's a form. You can either use the QR code or use the link I've put in the chat as well if you're interested in being part of that group. And of course, we'll open this up to beyond those that are just here right now, because I know some people aren't here. And I'll just quickly, I'll come back to slide in a moment, but I just wanted to quickly just talk through some of the things that are coming through the comments we've had online, through discussions I've been having with some of you and others. But in terms of how we work, the sort of ways that we work, there's two kind of areas I was thinking really that are emerging. There's sort of something about the processes, the ways of working. So, we're talking about sort of representation. How is HLP understood? Where does the advocacy sit? Where does it come from? What's the focal point? Do we make sure we maintain HLP leadership somewhere and somehow? So we've got that distinct voice around HLP issues. We have a focus for our advocacy, for our fundraising, for be able to advocate with the developments in the humanitarian program cycle, all of these kind of things. To make sure HLP is included as part of recovery and reconstruction with clear links to humanitarian response, so making sure that link's clear. Looking for local actors to co-lead HLP coordination wherever possible. This idea of a moral imperative to address disparities in capacity. So some places have a lot of resource on HLP, other people don't, other places don't. How can we sort of support that? Maybe the work we do with our Mine Action colleagues to maintain that and strengthen that wherever we're each placed. And again, this is something that came up last time as well, around localization, that legal advice is often best delivered by local actors and can be more cost effective. So again, the advocacy around that and support of that as well. So these were some issues that came up through comments on the document we were discussing before, and also in previous meetings from some of you. You probably recognize your words there. Other things that were coming out, particularly around the technical thematic programming areas that we want to make sure we emphasize are due diligence, streamlining with shelter, CCCM, WASH, food security, Mine Action. So being able to act as that sort of service to others as well, and to advocate for the inclusion of HLP issues within those responses, because we know they make them more effective, more value for money and better outcomes. That focus again on forced evictions, monitoring and responding, but also trying to prevent them as well. Reduce the risks. And this I think would cut right across the work that's being done by Shelter and CCCM colleagues as well. Then of course this focus, as Fernando mentioned, around restitution processes, resolution of land disputes, and how do we ensure they're sort of maintained for the longer term, supporting mechanisms around that, documentation safeguarding, and then sort of wider support for legal reform and policy areas as well around land government. So they were some of the areas that sort of coming out through the conversations already. And so I was sort of proposing we can join together to look at some of these issues and develop a document together. And we can do that sort of offline as well, sharing a document, working it together. But I think it would be interesting as well to maybe discuss and start to try and sort of put some flesh on the bones of what that might look like. But if you'd be interested in being part of that, you can either drop a message in here, fill in the form, or contact me by email or something like that. Any other way you find you can contact me is also very welcome. Just wanted to hear any reactions to that suggestion. And I guess the key sort of point to say is that, as has come through from some of the comments and probably from my presentation as well, we try and speak in and we advocate and we try and shout about what's important, but there is also a degree to which these discussions and decisions are being made, sort of beyond our sphere of influence. So in some ways we'll have to be pragmatic and react, but I sort of really believe that, having seen the way the HLP coordination and HLP people work in country when there's limited resources or there's various challenges, I don't doubt that we will be able to find innovative and creative ways of making sure the HLP issues are addressed and included. And I'm really keen to sort of get clear on, what are the key issues that we want to maintain, so that whatever happens, we can be well placed to sort of advocate and make the case for that. Because I believe, as others have said here and in other places, there's a real momentum around HLP. There's interest across different sectors. There's an understanding that this is important stuff to get right. And I think we can therefore really sort of push that and make sure these things are considered. I'll pause there for a moment and open up to any question, comment or reaction. And I had a couple of other totally separate things to share as well. stunned silence. Okay, cool. Well, firstly, I mean, just a quick question then, just in case anyone either thinks this is a good idea or a bad idea. If you think it's any comments on that would be helpful, even in the chat or wave or whatever. Great idea. All right, that'll do. So 100%, it's a great idea. That's based on the responses we've had. No, but please do, if you've got other ideas for what would be a better way to do this, then please do raise them. Let me know. Because really happy to hear those. I don't think I have the answer at all. So let's make sure we work together. Okay, well, I just wanted to share a couple of things before we finish. Yes, so there's been, sorry, let me just find the old PowerPoint again. Okay, so yeah, this is more to our sort of usual discussion area of tools and ideas and things that are being created and ways of working, the things that hopefully can allow us to work on these issues beyond thinking about structures and processes. There's been a sort of background piece of work going on over the last few months, led by our colleagues at IOM, to develop a sort of a place to gather some of the different HLP due diligence materials that have been developed through the protection cluster and the AoR, but also through the shelter cluster and the CCCM cluster. So this predated any discussion of a merger, but is also a kind of a joint effort to try and bring those things together, because we were trying to think, how do we make sure, we create a space for anyone who's working on anything that has some kind of engagement with land or housing or property to be able to find the due diligence resources. So it doesn't have to be hidden within the Global Protection Cluster website. It doesn't have to be specific to the shelter cluster or the CCCM cluster either. It can be a place where anyone can find the resources. So the idea was to kind of create this portal, which is currently sort of in beta form. So it's a kind of out there for comments and suggestions. And it'd be great if you could have a look at that. And yeah, maybe next time we'll have a proper sort of discussion around it. But I just wanted to highlight that today. The web address is in the chat, but is also on the screen. Let me know if there's any problems with that. And we're trying to make sure there's extra kind of resources and bring together all of the things that exist to have them in one space that people can access. And what we can have a proper presentation on this, like I say, but the idea is to say, there is sort of fairly generic ways of approaching due diligence, which of course then need to be adapted and focused. But what are the key kind of processes and steps? And then how are some of the examples, the cases, the tools that exist there to maybe help you design and shape your own work as well? So that's something that's been developed and is now online. So please do have a look and let us know any comments, feedback. It kind of was created, like I say, sort of by IOM colleagues, but is now sort of ready, I think, to be sort of tested a little bit. And if you have comments, thoughts on, the text, on the content, on the documents that are there, then please do let us know. So that's something to have a look at. The Special Rapporteur on the right to adequate housing is hosting a consultation for the upcoming report on land. So if you're interested in contributing to that, either joining the consultation next week or providing inputs, then this, you can see links in the chat, but you can, provide inputs to that process or join the consultation as well. So that might be something you're interested in as well. And like I say, I'll share the slides after the call. The other thing is, you remember we've spoken before about the HLP community of practice. So this was something that's been set up to, I guess, be a space that allows HLP discussion and resource sharing that goes beyond, humanitarian response or the protection cluster or the clusters or whatever, right? So different people from different sectors, some working more in a development context or thinking about sort of disaster preparedness, those kind of things, can sort of share insights, exchange, as well as with those who are focused on more humanitarian response, and there's spaces being set up in different languages as well. And this is something that the AoR is part of as well, and along with, I think, a number of you on the call as well. But again, you can join that through the link in the chat or on the screen. There's a QR code there. But it's, have a look and see and sign up and get chatting. Also, I think there's a space where people are sharing opportunities like job roles and things as well. So it's kind of an interesting and timely resource to be part of. So yeah, have a look at that. And then, what was that, the end? I think that's the end of my slides. And yeah, the other thing to mention, and again, we'll have more of a fuller discussion on next time, was there was the World Bank Land Conference happened a few weeks ago in Washington, DC. And there was a number of us hosted a session focused on disaster response and HLP within that. And it was quite interesting to be there working in that kind of crisis humanitarian response amongst people who are mainly focused on sort of development outcomes and development engagement as well. So it was great to try and sort of build that bridge and to sort of hear insights and see where there are parallels and see how we can work better together. There was also a session focused on women's access to land as well, which some of the colleagues working on HLP for NRC were part of, and others as well. But yeah, we'll have more of an update on that next time, but just wanted to mention that. I believe the recordings of those are going to be shared soon as well. So that's all sort of from my side. We have a couple of minutes if people want to comment, respond, share anything else, any other business, any other updates. Over to you. And like I say, in June we'll reconvene and have a more typical HLP AoR meeting where we can discuss some issues of HLP substance. But yeah, over to you for comments or reactions or anything from your side. Any other sort of questions or things people want to share about what they're working on or things of interest? Cool. Okay, well, we'll leave it there for now, and I'll follow up with the slides. And yeah, but it'd be great to have you join the team looking at advocating for the key HLP issues. And I'll follow up with an opportunity to join that as well. It's been very good for you to have you here, and thanks for your contributions to the discussion. Yeah, we're trying to gather all of these perspectives and opinions to really make sure we can include what we can around the advocacy we're doing going forward. But yes, good. Okay, final call for any other comments, otherwise we'll close. Okay, great, good. Well, thanks for joining, and we will be in touch, I am sure, and look forward to continuing working together wherever we are. But yeah, thanks so much, everyone. Cheers.